Hi, Elaine here from markergeek.com. I've got a card for you today which I created by masking together some of the Stamping Bella gnomes that were recently released along with one of the older releases. And also I'm showing you how I created the Distress Oxide background. At the moment you can see I'm using my Misty stamping tool to stamp the masks. I actually end up stamping more masks as I used more gnomes to create the scene than I first intended. I'm using Eclipse masking tape, which comes on a roll, and cutting the masks from that. You don't need to use a Misty or other stamping tool to do this. I just tend to use mine out of habit now. Now I'm setting up to start stamping, and this is where the Misty actually comes in really handy. I'm using a piece of acetate sheet to work out where I'm going to position the stamps before I stamp down on my paper. I'm applying the masks and then stamping the next one. All you have to remember when masking a scene like this is whatever you want to have in the front needs to be stamped and masked first. As I go on, you'll see that I'm using the same gnome repeatedly, the Happy Gnome from the Gnomes Have Feelings set. I also ended up using the Gnome Pile stamp twice on either side, but I varied the height a little bit just to give it a little bit of interest, make it slightly different. I didn't want it to be completely symmetrical. As you can see, that acetate sheet really is invaluable when trying to build a scene like this using rubber stamps, which, unlike clear stamps, obviously you can't see through. I'm stamping using My Favourite Things Extreme Black ink on Strathmore Bristol Smooth Surface card. This is a little different from my usual. Even though I'm intending to colour the gnomes using Copic markers, I chose to use the Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock because I wanted to do the Distress Oxide background. I do sometimes do this on the Make It Colour blending card that I prefer to use for Copic colouring, but I'm going to show you that in another video soon so that we can compare the difference. Here I'm using a Ranger craft sheet to do my ink blending on, and I'm using the Distress Oxide inks and the Ranger mini ink blending tools. I do still love to use the Distress inks sometimes, but Distress Oxides have definitely become my favourite for ink blending. They just go on so easily and so smoothly, and they're just so much easier to blend. As you can see, I was fighting a little bit with the masks on this, as with these detailed images you often get small areas and small pointy bits that peel up easily as you're trying to blend. So I'm trying to work around that using a dabbing motion around those parts, and yeah, kind of trying to fight with it a little bit. It is worth it, as in the end the background looks really good. Here I'm just adding the Salty Ocean. At the top, the colour I was using before, as you may have seen, was Cracked Pistachio. I really love this combination. I could of course have used Copic markers to colour a sky for my little gnome scene. However, I'm really preferring to use Distress Oxides at the moment. I just love the effects and the depth of colour that you can get with such ease, and the smoothness of it. I think that the Distress Oxide backgrounds work really nicely with Copic coloured images, and just add that little something extra in the background, that little extra bit of fun. As you can see, I'm going back and forth between the two colours, blending and trying to get the colour and blending that I'm happy with, that I'm looking for. When I'm done with that, I dry the piece with my heat gun, and then I will use a water spray to mist the paper and get that background effect. The effect that you get with distress oxides and distress inks when misting with water will differ depending on the paper or cardstock that you use. So test out what you have and see the different effects. Some of them give a more blurry effect, a more sort of diffuse effect, and others have like sharper edges to the droplets. So play around and see what you like and what works for you. As you can see, I'm blotting up the water really quickly straight away with a piece of paper towel. The Strathmore Bristol Smooth Surface paper, while it does stand up quite nicely to this technique, isn't a watercolour paper, so you do want to be fairly careful with how much water you add and how wet you get it. It's also wise to be fairly cautious with the water because, of course, the masks are paper, and if you get them wet, then it will soak through to the layer underneath. And now you'll see me doing something I don't normally do, but Kelly Latavola, our current Wonderful Wednesday guest on the Stamping Bella blog, quite often uses perfect pearls like this. Basically, perfect pearls mixed with a little bit of water on the craft sheet, and then using a paintbrush flicked off the edge of an acrylic block just to give a spatter, just to give a fun sparkly spatter on the background as well. I love how that turned out, so I'll probably be doing it again. Again, I was just fairly careful about how much water I used, and then dried it with my heat gun before removing the masks. And I always love that part, removing the masks. It's like magic. Suddenly a lovely scene appears. Once I'd removed the masks, I then trimmed down the panel on the edges because I was making an A6 card and I wanted to have a border at either side. So I trimmed it down slightly. This video isn't really about the Copic colouring, although I am leaving that portion in, albeit sped up quite a bit. Otherwise this would be an incredibly long video. The entire card probably took, I don't know, an hour and a half or so to put together. If you would like to see exactly how I have coloured each of the Gnome stamps previously, I do have separate colouring videos. If they aren't currently available, they are coming in the next week, as I'm continuing to upload all of the colouring videos for the spring 2018 release. So if you want to see exactly how I colour the gnome beards and the gnome hats, etc., then check those out. This video was really more about the distress oxide blending and masking and stamping the scene. I'm going to put on some music now for the rest of the colouring, and I'll be back towards the end. I love how this one turned out in the end. It's just a really fun little scene. Now you can see I've got my Misty back out, and I am going to stamp a sentiment from the birthday sentiment set. I'm using that acetate sheet to make sure I've got my sentiment straight and exactly where I want it. As you can see, not quite straight, so I'm having to adjust it. I find this is really the quickest and easiest way with rubber stamps to figure out exact positioning and getting things straight. I double stamped it so that it would be nice and bold. And then I'm using a Copic multi-liner, I think it's the 0.03 size, just to add back some of the little detailed lines at the tops of the hats that became obscured a little by the Distress Oxide ink, because it is slightly, it's opaque because of the pigment properties. Now I'm trimming down a panel to go underneath my stamped scene and scoring and folding a card blank and gluing everything down using my favourite liquid glue, Beacon Adhesives Fabri-Tac, which I've been using for years. As you can see, that Perfect Pearls sparkle really catches the light nicely. And that's it for this card. Thank you for joining me. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and check out the other videos on my channel, and I will catch you next time.